Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
But we're more than just talking, but Herb will tell you more about that in just a moment. Please take a moment to click the like button. That's the thumb. Please click the subscribe button. That's the button that says subscribe. And please click the notifications button. That's the one with the little bell. And those buttons make our show much more visible beyond the 35 people who currently watch our show. And so we appreciate you doing that for us, and we hope it benefits you in some way. But even if it doesn't benefit you, please do it anyway. Thanks.
So, if you're new to this channel, each week Todd and I take a moment to talk about the upcoming weekend's lectionary passage from the Gospels. And our goal is to talk about those passages in the context of love and inclusion and social justice. And our hope is that our talking will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something we might say during this exchange would inspire you alongside of us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what passage are we looking at this week?
We are continuing in the Gospel of Mark. We're in chapter 8, verses 27 through 38, conversation between Jesus and Peter, and then some further conversation between Jesus and the disciples.
Yeah, I have to say, just right off the bat, Todd, I really do love it when the lectionary is in one of the synoptic gospels. And the fact that we're spending so much time in Mark, it makes me happy.
Yes.
What do you think of what we did this beginning, this declaration by Peter here in the beginning? You got any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it appears to be one of these important points, and we see this passage. Versions of these passages show up in other gospels as well. It's an important statement, I think, for the different communities who put together the gospels to have a point where Jesus is identified in a more special way, that there is some identification with that. Um, and it's interesting that in these different passages that it's Peter who is the one who presents this uniqueness about Jesus. It's the other disciples who talk about how other people are identifying him, but then Peter says, that's how others are seeing you, but we see you as the Messiah.
Do you see this as kind of maybe, the Markan community? Um, this is the gospel's written for the Markan community, and that community recognized the apostleship of Peter. Do you think this is just kind of like an endorsement of Peter, like Peter checks off the box of recognizing Jesus correctly according to that community? In other words, you need to say certain things about Jesus in order to be a leader in that community. And Peter did here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I mean,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No. I think you're right. I think it's interesting that at least in the other gospel passages that carry this story, that they also choose Peter. So it seems like there's some unity. It only seems that the Gospel of John seems to really push forward John, not necessarily in this particular story, but just really tries to elevate the person of John, obviously, as an important apostle. But yeah, I think you're right. There's clear, and the tradition says that Mark is being Peter's mouthpiece. We know that's not actually really true, but there clearly is still some connection between the Markan community and their loyalty to Peter. And so I think you're right. It is wanting to make sure that he is seen as a lead authority, as subsequently taking on the mantle in a way, following Jesus.
I think whatever conversation we have about this section, I just appreciate the nuance being used here because uh, Jesus as Messiah has been wielded by Christians in such destructive ways, especially for the Jewish community. Um, it helps me get my head around it a little bit more easily if this really isn't about Jesus being the Messiah, but a community that always already recognized Jesus as the Messiah, and Peter recognizes him as the Messiah too. So therefore, Peter checks the box. He's a legitimate leader for this community. It's kind of an in-house discussion. What I think Christianity has done with this is not seen that subtlety there historically, but just seen
Hmm.
this not as so much a declaration of Peter, and Peter's ability to recognize what the church already believed, but more about Jesus, where Jesus is the Messiah, and that's the truth, and then you get into it's led to a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism among Christians. With then you get into the discussion of the rejection of the Messiah and what was the
Hmm.
Messiah, what was the Messiah supposed to accomplish, when did
Hmm.
people start even believing in him?
Yeah.
It's just
I mean,
problematic.
and even beyond anti-Semitism, but just general Christian supremacy in general, where there's just
Yep.
there there's no room for any kind of pluralism, any kind of recognition of God working amongst other religious groups and other and cultural ethnic groups that may not historically have espoused Christianity. And so there's just been a great deal of prejudice has done, and just this very egocentric bad behavior
Yeah, so
with this passage.
it's subtle, but again, I see this. I'm more comfortable with seeing this passage as putting forth Peter as someone who checked the box of a requirement to be a
Hmm.
leader in the early Jesus community than I am this being a hard line in the sand. You know what I mean about Jesus?
Hmm. And
I'm
the the early or not the early, but the Christian church from Constantine and even before Constantine, once it started moving away from the early church fathers, they're pretty quickly, they actually did use these passages to elevate the status of Peter, and certainly by the time of Constantine and after, Peter was enshrined as the first bishop of the Christian church,
right.
the first pope, if you will. And so there was, for a while there at least, it really actually became politically this passage became very politically important in establishing a, uh, a, a line of succession of leadership. So it got perverted in a different way, in a sense, in establishing the church's hierarchical power. So it's been twisted multiple ways, and so unfortunately I don't come away from this with kind of just wish people would say, like, this guy is living and speaking the truth, and this he gives us a way of life that puts all other ways of life to shame in comparison, and we want to follow him and live this life. He has not just the words of life, but the very acts and choices of life. What he is doing, how he is calling us to live, is the way to live. I wish there was more of that type of reaction and that kind of statement that was being made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just say what you mean. Don't throw a title on it. Just say
Right.
what you mean. Yeah. And if this is a new idea to any of our listeners, let me just say again, the early church was anything but monolithic, and you had different communities in the early Jesus movement that recognized the authority of different apostles. You know, some recognized the apostleship of John, and that was the Johannine community. You know, you've got here Peter being lifted up and his authority. But there were others. There were those who recognized the apostleship of Mary Magdalene. There were those who recognized the apostleship of Thomas. And
Mhm.
those are just two that are mentioned in the Gospel of John. I think in the Synoptics, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the Synoptics, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, the only apostle that's really lifted up like this is Peter. They're pretty Peter
Believe so.
centric. I mean, they're all
Believe so.
mentioned, but Peter's always seems to be the one in this interchange.
Hmm. Hmm. It seems like you get that taste of the other apostles in John. Uh, to John's credit, that's one of John's
Yeah, one of the
good
things John does good.
contributions is giving you a broader picture of early Christianity. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what you're just seeing in the synoptics is Peter being elevated.
Yeah, one of the things that John does well is elevating
Hmm.
other apostles. There was more egalitarian in a time when the church was trying to become pretty hierarchical.
Hmm. But enough about John.
But we were saying something
Sorry,
nice about John
I
for a
know
minute,
we
Todd.
were saying something nice about John, but that's there's not that many other things. So let's move back to Mark.
All
So.
right. So, what I really feel a burden to talk about this week is this section here at the end of our reading in the lectionary, where Jesus just says, if anyone wants to, what does he say? Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit your soul? So I come from a religious history where I witnessed, especially within my own family growing up, when people would in my family would suffer abuse. And I'm thinking specifically of my mother, who at one time in her life, when I was very young, was married to a very abusive spouse. And the pastor actually counseled her to stick with it, that she might be able to change his heart. She might be able to change him. She could be the key to his salvation. And the language that he used was that we all have a cross to bear. And
Hmm.
this would be hers, just to take up her cross and bear it. And, there have been a ton of women, especially, and I don't think it's just women. I know that, women are not the only ones who suffer in domestic violence, especially with non heteronormative partnerships and marriages. Abuse can affect all genders.
Hmm.
Um, but how many women specifically have lost where that kind of counsel has been lethal to them, where they've actually lost their life because they were sticking it out in a very life threatening, dangerous situation that finally erupted and it
Hmm.
was lethal to that spout, to that partner. Um, and it seems to me that when we interpret this passage this way, what we're really telling someone, if we back up and look at it and we try to generalize it, what we're telling someone is anyone who's experiencing abuse or injustice or oppression, just bear it. Just
Hmm.
bear it. Bear your cross, bear the injustice with the hope that maybe your bearing of it will change the heart and mind of your abuser or your oppressor.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
there's a ton of literature out there from feminist and womanist scholars who lay into that type of theology, that type of interpretation, that type of um, counsel. And I'm thinking of Jacqueline Grant, Dr. Jacqueline Grant, who I believe in the the forward to Dr. Dolores Williams' Sisters in the Wilderness, she calls upon preachers who preach this kind of preaching to cease and desist. I mean, she just lays it flat out, cease and desist, that it is violent and it is dangerous.
Hmm.
So, are there other ways to interpret this passage, or do we just chuck it?
Well, and that's my question is just, do we have any historical context to say what is going through the Markan community's experience at this time that this type of language would be necessary or even encouraging or a rallying cry? Is there anything? Because in some ways, to me, this sounds in a Jesus way, a militaristic rallying cry, in the sense of, rather than carry your weapons or something like this, in the very much of the self-sacrificial way, we are going to continue to lead on and doing the work that I've called you to, but we know that but you are entering into a work that, like me, will end most likely in a premature death. That and again, is there? Do you have any idea from the historical context that anything like this is going on in the Markan community, where they're feeling like they have to take a stand for something?
I don't think life comes from sacrificing yourself. I don't think life comes from embracing death. Life comes from life. Life comes from refusing to let go of life. And one of the challenges that I have, it's if we're looking historically to answer your question, just if we don't spiritualize what it means to take up your cross, but we take it, this is one of the few times where I'll say this with the Bible, we take it literally.
Mm-hmm.
People who passively endured the injustice they were suffering in Jesus's society didn't end up on a cross. There was no cross for them to bear. The
Mm-hmm.
only people that ended up on a cross were those people who refused to passively endure what was
Mm-hmm.
being done to them. And they stood up to it and they spoke out and they called for change or revolution or revival. That's how John the Baptist got beheaded. That's how Jesus got crucified. So what I see Jesus saying here, at least behind the scenes, if we just take it, if we don't spiritualize and take it literal, if there's a cross that they're being called to bear, they must be being threatened with a cross for speaking out already against, for standing up to the injustice.
For calling
And
for the chance for the people that they're fighting for to have the life that they deserve. They are ambassadors for living rather than ambassadors for dying. But the very fact that they are fighting for the rights of other people to live fully is putting their personal lives at risk, where they might be put on a cross as traitors
mm,
to the empire.
mhm, mhm.
So it is what I'm hearing you say is that, unfortunately, for a long time, and certainly in many modern Christian cultures, we misunderstand this and take it as passively enduring suffering, rather than saying it is so important that people who do not have access to the rights and privileges to live a fully human life, that they are so important to me that I am willing to stand up for them and risk my reputation, risk my livelihood, risk even perhaps my life for them. I am so committed to fighting for their life that I realize that I have not fully lived until I've engaged for them. That may ultimately risk my livelihood, at least, if not more than that.
Life itself.
And
Yeah.
so that, but it's about embracing life to the fullest for the people in our lives that we have come to care about. And
And
so
even
it's,
for them themselves too. I mean, there are areas I think where all of us, where it's not even about them, it could be about me. There are areas where all of us suffer injustice.
mm,
And what I'm trying to say is that I don't think a cross is intrinsic to following Jesus. And I'm
mhm,
going to explain what I mean by that. So following Jesus does call you to speak out against systemic injustice when we encounter it.
mhm,
If those who are threatened by us, by our speaking out, those who have everything to lose, those whom systemic change would cause them to lose privilege or power, if our speaking out is a threat to them and they in turn turn around and threaten us, trying to get us to be quiet or to be silent, and they threaten us with whatever that cross is, that's the cross.
yes,
Not the initial injustice that we should bear. No, it's what those who are threatened by our calls for change threaten us with, to try to
mhm,
motivate us to sit down and shut up and to stop
mhm,
creating a scene, stop rocking the boat. And Jesus, in that context, is saying, don't be silent,
mhm,
embrace the cross.
mhm,
Whatever their threat is, don't let them don't let them cause you to let go of life. Keep
yeah,
holding on to life. Don't let go. And that's what I see Jesus doing. That's what I see him calling his disciples to do. Um, I find it interesting here that, we talk about substitutionary crosses. Jesus isn't here saying, I'm going to do this for you. He's saying, I want you to join me in doing this with me. It's participatory,
mhm,
not substitutionary.
mhm,
Um, but at the same time, um, I think it makes a big, it's subtle. It can be subtle in how someone explains it or understands it, but it makes a big difference in how we interpret what it means to take up your cross. If taking up your cross means don't be silent when they threaten you,
mhm,
then the rest of the passage makes more sense to me. Whoever wants to save their life by being silent will end up losing it. How many of us have lost ourselves when we're quiet about something
mhm,
that we knew was wrong, but we chose to turn a
mhm,
blind eye, right? We lost a piece of our humanity there. Whoever loses their life for me in the gospel will save it. Keep speaking out, in other words.
mhm,
What good is it if you gain the whole world but forfeit your soul? That makes way more sense to me in the
mhm,
context of someone trying to make me shut up about
mhm,
injustice. What
mhm,
good is it if they buy you off? Okay, fine. So you've gained the whole world through your silence.
mhm.
You forfeited your
So what?
soul.
So what?
You've lost touch with your humanity.
Yep. Yeah. So that's much better. And I think you're right. I think where all of this stuff gets thrown off track is when we when we embrace a gospel of Jesus being preordained to take up a cross and
Mm,
intentionally that death was part of the salvific equation in
right, right.
order to solve the problem.
And
And so
somehow it's
therefore
part of ours too.
and so suffering is redemptive.
Right.
And that is fundamentally, and that's where it throws everything and twists all of these narratives around, rather than saying that Jesus so lived so fully and lived so powerfully for the vast majority of society who were being held under the thumb of Rome, held under the thumb of the religious system that was co-opted by Rome, that when he was standing up for them and then standing up for the rights of those marginalized by Rome, those marginalized by the religious system, standing up for those who did not have a voice and say, they matter. They'll be a part of my community, and you can march with me, you can walk with me, you are part of my family, you are sons and daughters of God. When I'm telling you that becomes part of a revolutionary movement that scares authority figures, and then they have to stop it because he is creating a whole knew what he described as a kingdom. We would describe as a whole new community, a whole new way of life. He is creating something that is undermining a corrupt, broken system.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
that's why he was killed.
right, right. Jesus calls us to life. And when they threaten us for laying hold of that life, he says, keep holding on to it. Don't let
Right.
go of it. And the reason I bring that up is because in the context of this passage, there are a lot of preachers out there who like to quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer here, where Bonhoeffer said, when Jesus calls a man to follow him, he calls that man to die.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take that out of its context, immediate context, if you take
Mm-hmm.
Bonhoeffer out of his context,
Right.
then absolutely you can get the wrong message. Jesus doesn't
Yes.
call us to die. Jesus calls us to live. He calls us to the path of life. He's showing us the way to life. Um, but in Bonhoeffer's situation, the way of life meant probably dying because he was standing up to Nazi Germany and their injustice and Holocaust toward the Jewish people and many others.
Yep.
And for him to do what's right meant going up against the party in charge at the moment, and that meant that he was probably himself going to be executed, which in the end, that's what happened to him.
But in
So I
order
can
to
understand.
literally attempt to save lives,
Yes,
he was devoted to saving lives. And when we
and
and I
that's the
think just
subtle
to
difference.
yes, and just
It's
to say,
so
and just to throw get the full picture, Herb. I just you mentioned obviously the Jews. I just want to throw in other religious minorities along with that, and then LGBTQ people as
that's
well,
right.
and even people, all the people that the German authorities viewed as inferior human beings that were less than what they perceived to be the Aryan race, and so they were Bonhoeffer chose to save lives, not if he embraced this, he would have said, well, I guess right now what God is calling these Jewish folks and these other religious minorities and sexual minorities is to carry their cross for the sake of the kingdom, and that is
Yeah, that would
that
be a
is
misinterpretation.
I have a better word, that would be bullshit.
Okay,
That's what I would go with.
all right.
Because because I think we've done a good job. I'm going to pat ourselves on the back, especially you, at showing where we how we really need to understand this passage. And I don't believe it's a misinterpretation of the passage. I think it is really digging into and reading the context of the passage to understand what Jesus is actually saying. Even as Mark probably is already being influenced at this point by some of the other uh, teachings about what Jesus is doing, and maybe some of the early atonement theory is already starting to permeate. There's still enough of maybe of actual context from what Jesus was actually teaching that we're getting at what you and I are talking about tonight is still there, that we can see what Jesus is actually living for.
I don't think Jesus wanted to be the only one that ended up on a Roman cross.
Hmm.
I think he wanted others to join him in his speaking out. He's about to go into the temple and flip the tables and
Yep.
stand up to the system. And he wanted their participation rather than their running, or their running
Hmm.
away. And just to clarify with Bonhoeffer too, I understand what words Bonhoeffer used, but what Bonhoeffer was choosing to do when threatened by Nazi Germany was refusing to let go of life and love and justice, even
Yep.
if it cost him his life for doing so.
He could have stayed in America. He could have stayed in America and rode the thing out. And
Yeah, he could have stayed at Union Seminary and just,
yeah.
but
And he went back to. I mean, you want to talk about carrying a cross in a sense, if you want to call it that. He went right back into the belly of the beast for the sake of saving life.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's a book out there, which I want to recommend tonight called Christianity, Patriarchy, and Abuse. I just thought of it and reached around and grabbed it off my bookshelf. It's out of print. If you can get a copy on Amazon or at a library or on a Goodreads or on a something, I don't know where you can get used books from, but Christianity, Penetrate, and Abuse. And if you can't get a copy of that, then just at least Google "God So Loved the World?" by Parker and Brown. That essay alone, it's chapter 2 of this book, but it's a standalone essay as well. And yeah, I think it'll be a benefit to you if you're grappling with what we're talking about here tonight, if you're wrestling with that, trying to make sense out of it.
What else did you want to get in on this passage this week, Herb?
That's what jumped out at me, and it's probably just because of my own history with it. That's it.
Well, this is I've known you for a while now, and I know this is one of your heartbeat passions, and I resonate with you, and I appreciate.
I don't want people to put up with injustice and abuse.
No, and with this is, do never preach this. Never go to a people group that is suffering, and tell them this is God's will for you. Endure it. If you're going to show up to a people group, you better be you better be saying, I'm fighting for you, and if there's anything I can do to get others to join the cause, to lift you up, and if you have any ways that you can lead me into helping you, that's what I want to do. I want to help be part of bringing life for you, rather than telling you to patiently suffer in silence.
Yeah, yeah. I just finished reading, I think it's Mujerista Theology, by, I'm going to butcher the name, Isasi Diaz Ada Maria. Yeah, and one of the things that she brings out of it's Latin American feminist theology or womanist theology from Latin America. And one of the things that she brings out in that book is that suffering doesn't give life. The
No.
struggle gives life. The
Yeah.
struggle, fighting for life is what gives life.
Yeah.
Life is in the struggle, not in the passive acceptance.
If we agreed that suffering was all good, we would only celebrate fall and winter,
Right.
and we would never pay attention to spring, because spring is the struggle. When you see the winter thaw, and then you start to see these little green sprouts fighting with everything they got to come up through that rock and soil and bring life back. That's what we're being called to. We're called to come back through cold ground and bring life back. That's what it's about. It's about resurrection, which is a whole other thing that is core to Herb's message as well. It's not about the death, it's about the resurrection.
It really is. It really is.
Anyway,
All right, man. You got anything else from this passage this week, Todd?
I don't. I think you did well, sir. I'm happy with it, and
All right.
I think we gave. If people are preaching this weekend or teaching or anything, you got some stuff to work with.
Yeah,
And
please don't tell them to keep putting up with injustice.
no, please don't celebrate the cross. Celebrate a life that is so powerful and so well lived that perhaps they might end up on a cross, but not. But it was their life that redeemed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I like that.
You'll continue to get inspiration like this if you go to renewedheartministries.com, because there you will find Herb's weekly writings on his blog about the lectionary passage. You will also find ways to get newsletters where not only will you read from Herb, you'll also get book recommendations and other inspiration in his newsletters, both his monthly e-newsletters and his quarterly snail mail newsletters, and then you'll also get connected to his podcasts, obviously to this first class YouTube show, and also a connection to his books that he's written. So wonderful things at renewedheartministries.com. And a thank you to
Excellent.
everyone who supports his ministry. That is something that means the world to him. And I appreciate it as well, just because I know that you are supporting good work and good people. Please, if you haven't considered doing so, maybe tonight is the night you make a one-time donation, or maybe you've made a one-time donation in the past, but now maybe you can say, you know, I can do a monthly recurring donation. Thanks for taking the time to do that, to support renewedheartministries.com. And
Thanks,
don't forget
Todd.
to pick up Herb's book, Finding Jesus, which you can find at Amazon or at his website or at Kindle.
Wow. Man, this was a great infomercial, Todd. Thank you so much.
I'm trying, man. I'm
No, I
trying.
appreciate it. I'm not being facetious. I appreciate it.
So, anything else you got, sir?
That's it for this week. Thank everybody who's listening. So glad
I'm
you
just
tuned
gonna,
in.
I'll give you an update on my life.
Yes, please.
Uh, Not that it matters,
No, it
but
does.
I have finished my year of hospital chaplaincy and my CPE training. So I am now a board certified eligible chaplain. I have to go before a review board in the next few months to be certified as a chaplain. But I'm grateful for the process that I've been through for this year. And so I am in the hunt for a chaplaincy job as we speak. At the same time, I've recognized my desire to pursue a master's in counseling. And so I'm doing a master's in clinical mental health counseling in an online degree at the University of the Cumberlands. So just to let you know where I am, and we'll be doing that for the next couple of years while hopefully doing chaplaincy as my day job. So
That's great, Todd. I'm cheering you on over here.
thanks,
I'm
man.
so happy for you. Well
I will
done.
be asking you to help me write some papers. So,
Yeah, right. I can just put you in touch with a good editor.
oh, okay. Well, even that would be great. So, all right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed your time. We hope you have a great week, and we will catch up with you soon.
All right. We'll see you next week, everyone.